Welcome again to the show, everyone. I'm Vin. I want to start today with a single massive number that should make every single Australian take a very deep breath. $4.9 billion. That is not a federal infrastructure budget, and it is not the annual revenue of some global tech giant. That is the amount of money ordinary Australians signed up to borrow in a single 3-month quarter just to put new sets of keys in their pockets. Let that sink in for a second. Nearly $5 billion of debt locked in over just 90 days. And look, we all know how it happens. You walk onto a dealership lot, the paint is gleaming under the floodlights, that new car smell is literally designed to trigger a dopamine hit, and suddenly the practicalities of a long-term financial commitment just sort of melt away. The typical Australian car loan has now climbed to an average of $34,282. That is 34 grand of tomorrow's money, spent today on an asset that starts losing value the absolute second your front tyres clear the dealership driveway. But the real story is in the divide between those buying shiny and those buying sensible. If you look at the data, the average loan for a brand new car in this country has skyrocketed to $46,155. Compare that to used car financing, which sits at a much lower but still significant $28,658. That is a massive $17,500 premium just to be the very first person to register a VIN number. Now, the standard justification is always the same, right? Oh, it has a warranty, it's reliable, I won't have to worry about repairs. But when you look at the sheer scale of the debt market, you realize we are not buying reliability anymore. We are financing immediate gratification. We are trading $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 of future wealth for the short-term high of driving something flawless. And the gap between what we think we can afford in that emotional moment and the reality of what we actually have to pay back is wider than it has ever been. This brings us to the quiet hangover that happens once that new car smell finally fades. Right now, over a quarter of all Australian car borrowers, 28% to be exact, openly admit they regret their finance decision. Just think about that. Nearly 1 in 3 people driving around in a financed car are actively wishing they had never signed the paperwork. And if you zoom in on Gen Z, the younger buyers who are just starting out, that regret rate skyrockets to a massive 54%, more than half of them. Why is this happening? Well, the data points to a massive vulnerability in how we shop for finance. Nearly half of those who regret their loan, 47% actually, did not compare interest rates, did not call their bank, and did not check online brokers. They simply walked into the dealership, sat in that little glass office, and trusted the business manager to choose their finance package for them. They let the person whose entire job is to maximize the profit on the transaction decide how they would pay for it. It is the ultimate asymmetric game. The dealer frames the entire conversation around a single harmless-sounding question. What can you afford to pay per week? They tell you it's just $160 a week. They portray the repayment as if it was to sound like a gym membership and a couple of nice dinners, right? But when you scale that up, the average monthly repayment in Australia is now over $710. That is over $8,500 a year before you even buy a single litre of petrol, pay for registration, or shell out for comprehensive insurance. Focusing on low weekly payments is the oldest trick in the book, and it completely masks the true cost of interest, balloon payments, and dealer origin fees. By the time the buyer realizes they have locked themselves into a 5-year contract, where they will pay $10,000 more than the car is actually worth, the papers are signed, the dealer has taken their commission, and the buyer is left holding the bag. If you want the ultimate proof that the system is broken, you only have to look at the corporate regulator. ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, has been running reviews into car finance, and the statistics they are pulling out are absolutely brutal. Get this. Half of all car loan defaults in this country happen within the very first 6 months of the loan. 6 months. That is not a case of someone losing their job 3 years down the line. That is a loan that was fundamentally unviable from the very day the consumer walked out of the dealership. It was a failure of assessment, plain and simple. Let me tell you one thing I have seen in my time. Something as simple as finance officers putting down less dependence on the application, not to save you money, but to save their commission. That is what we are talking about here. And the consequences of these defaults are devastating. There is this common myth that if you cannot pay, you just give the car back, the debt is cleared, and you start fresh. But that is not how it works. A staggering 90% of Australians who have their cars repossessed still owe more than half of their original loan balance even after the car is taken and sold through disposal channels that the banks choose to use. Why, you ask? Because of rapid depreciation and massive upfront fees packed into the loan from day one. So imagine this. You buy a $40,000 car, you default, the bank repossesses it and sells it at a wholesale value for $25,000. But with the high interest, broker fees and default charges, you still owe $35,000. The car is gone, you have no transport to get to work, and you still owe the bank $10,000. That is the post-repossession debt overhang, and it is a financial trap that is incredibly difficult to climb out of for most unassuming everyday Australians. Here is a specific example I had a few years ago. A young man was trying to sell his motorbike to me. He insisted that he needed cash payment for the transaction. I eased him, stating it was a business transaction account that utilizes OSCO and he would receive the money before he left. But he still wanted the cash more. I did a PPSR check and found it had an encumbrance. I asked him if he loaned against the motorcycle when he bought it new, and he said he didn't. I then had to verify with the selling dealer to check if his name matched the original contact, and not so surprisingly, it did. Here is the guy thinking he can just take the cash, continue to pay the loan, and pocket the money, and perhaps eventually just stop paying the loan. Because if it got repossessed, well, that wasn't his problem anymore. In context to your new car purchase and the theme of the education around this episode, I recommend teaming up with a broker like Focus Financial Solutions. With access to many different lenders, they are not contained to offering just one be-all and end-all type of loan deal or package. They can talk through a strategy to the best sense of your situation and provide the best outcome for both parties. It's unfortunate, but the truth to this is, it is not what the banks do. There is a reason those big fours and the other offshoots make anywhere up to $6 billion on average per annum. Your financial interests are not at their heart. They are at theirs. And unfortunately, it is somewhat one of a cold one. At the end of the day, true control in the car market does not come from negotiating a slightly lower price on a set of floor mats, and it certainly does not come from letting a dealer manage your money. It comes from stepping back, recognizing these massive systemic forces, and prioritizing hard, cold financial clarity over the artificial speed of the dealership floor. Because when the music stops, the dealer is already looking at their next sale, but you are the one who has to live with the contract. Thanks for listening today. I'm Vin, and I'll catch you next time.